Nelson, who was at the Democratic National Convention of 1968.
Right. Hello, I'm John Nelson. In 1968, I was 16 years old, and my father had gotten me my first decent camera. So I took the family car down to Chicago, and earlier in the day, they had been setting up, or over the previous days, they had been setting up all the paraphernalia of putting on a major convention. And so my job at that time was being a chauffeur for my dad, who was a painting contractor. And so over the course of a few days earlier in the week before the convention started, I'm driving my dad around down by Grant Park and just saw all the chairs going up and the whole thing being put together. And then towards the end of the week, the big riot was on Wednesday. And on all the news shows, of course, they were showing the police beating up the hippies and the yippies and the people who were protesting the war. Wednesday night in particular was just incredible, just head bashing and police chasing people through the park. There was thousands of yippies demonstrating and just madness. So Thursday night happened to be the night then that I realized how much fun it was going to be down there. I grabbed the family car, my brand new camera from Dad and Mom for my 16th birthday, and headed down to the city and just started snapping pictures. I didn't get that many because it was so intense, and you can see in this picture, the National Guard are lined up on across from the Conrad Hilton Hotel, which is right here, and all the protesters are on the other side of the street, and it was a big face-off trying to keep the I suppose they thought they were trying to keep control of the massing hordes. So I'm just walking up and down the line here snapping pictures, and that's one of them. And this is pretty much what it looked like when you're sitting there or standing there on the side of the street across from the Hilton. They have all these buses and barbed wire encrusted jeeps. This is what you're faced with. The real terrorists were the Chicago police. They were just out of control, hated the hippies, hated the yippies.
What?
Excuse me?
What was the difference between the hippies and the yippies?
Well, that's just like just a name, but the yippies were the Youth International Party, which were a very political group of people protesting the war through any means necessary. It was just just a madcap group of politicos who were very much against the war and thought that definite action, meaning organizing groups to come from around the country and protest during the convention and make their voice heard about the war. And hippies, it's just a name. It's just, there was a lot of, unlike today, there was a lot of people who took a very active role in various demonstrations around the country. There's things in Washington. Chicago just happened to be a melting pot where total violence erupted. And the violence all came from the police. National Guardsmen did not participate in that end of the things, but the police with their nightsticks and their penchant for violence was just horrifying, and the whole country saw it. And and of course it added a lot to the popular ferment against the war, that an entire generation was willing to get out there on the streets. And that's that's what we see here. This is a kid who's got a helmet on, and I think I told you guys before, he's holding a bottle because everybody was being tear gassed, and people were going around washing out your eyes if you got tear gas in the eye. So he's kind of like a quasi-medic. Here's somebody, he's wearing that because he's being gassed, and you don't want to inhale the gas. And that kind of madness of smoke and people swinging clubs and all the rest of it was what was going on. Here's just some close-ups of the same thing. It was the National Guardsmen were all wearing gas masks because they didn't want to be gassed. I put in, these are just kind of fake captions that I just kind of wrote in there that I thought were funny at the time. But it was there's a young kid with love on his shirt. That was typical of the so-called, they weren't really riots and protests in those days. There's a lot of people who were peacefully protesting, but what they were faced with was very unpeaceful results from the police. I put this together my God, in the late 60s, so this has been, this is like, what is that? That's 35 years ago. And you see there's so many people there. It was just intense. thousands of people, thousands of, or hundreds anyway, of police and National Guardsmen. See one of those Jeeps there that has the barbed wire front on it. It was ridiculous in a way because, I mean, people were not throwing Molotov cocktails. I mean, this was not Prague in '68, this was Chicago. Here's an effigy being burned. I believe that was the effigy of Mayor Daley, as I recall at the time. You can see here, I had this stuff processed September of '68, just happened a month earlier. The TV, you know, obviously TV was all over there filming this whole thing. It was on the news every night. That's actually an effigy being strung up and burned, you know, whoever it was Daley or whatever. You have business people going home in the middle of all this madness. And that's basically the pictures I took. I didn't end up taking that many. And I was only there that one night. I do remember that my parents were like totally freaked out when they remembered I had taken the car and was probably down in the middle of this madness. And of course, nothing happened to me. You know, I was pretty careful. I think I told Joe an anecdote though, where, you know, I was really excited. I was 16. I had my camera, and I'm trying to get closer to these guardsmen, and I'm stepping off the sidewalk, snapping close-ups of them. And this big black guy who was standing behind me at one point grabbed me by the shirt and yanked me back just before this guy was going to take a swing at me with his rifle, you know, to get out of their way. He says, "What do you want to do? Die?" And you know, it was scary. It was a really intense evening. And that's, you know, pretty much my experience with it.
You see similarities between the Vietnam conflict and what's going on now?
What amazes me right now is that it's almost as if we didn't learn anything from 35 years ago. You know, that this happened in 1968, and you would think that not just the protests and how the populace was, to a large extent, you know, I mean, everybody was captivated by, you know, either being for the war or against the war. I mean, it wasn't like everybody was against the war in those days by any means. But what followed was that ultimately it was a huge failure, the Vietnam experience, and I think what we had all thought is we had learned a lesson about that kind of intervention in other countries, where our national self-interest was less about the people and more, say in the case of, you know, the Vietnam War, it was more about communist containment. Now it's about oil. I think everybody is pretty much you know, in agreement. And our national self-interest is being camouflaged again as being something that doesn't exist. You know, we're there for other reasons, to serve these people. Well, it's clear that's not why we're there, and we're repeating the same mistakes of the past. It's a disheartening experience, I think, to anybody who's lived through both experiences. It's also disheartening that people of a generation are not being more active against the war. You know, I'm just amazed that you guys are doing a great thing, I think, just by, even in a grassroots way, expressing anything. Because doesn't it seem to you guys that there's just not this popular ferment of, you know, there should be thousands of people out in the streets right now expressing themselves, and they're not. You know, I don't know if that's because people your age don't feel they can have an impact on the process or what it is, but it's not happening.